Welcome to the Commonwealth Matters. It is hard to believe that another year is in the books, and joining us for this year-end review is Ron Hicks, dear brother and friend. And Ron, it is so good to have you on the program. It's been a year since you've been on, hasn't it been?
It has been. It's been a minute. It has been a minute. I was telling my wife Janet, who is friends with you as well. I said, "Hey, I'm going to be doing a radio show with Richard," and she made sure to tell me to pass along my greetings to you and your bride as well.
Well, thank you, man. I recall when we did radio, and for the listeners not familiar with Ron, it's been a full year. We had done radio together for well over, I want to say, 10 years, something like that. Uh, we did a live 1 hour program in West Kentucky, in Hopkinsville, WNKJ. It was Wednesday mornings. It was called The Front Porch, and Ron was my sidekick. We had a great time doing that program. Man, I miss you, and I miss those programs. But here we are. We get to talk about 2024, and what I want to do in this show today is to go over the high points of 2024. We're going to talk about politics, social issues. We're going to talk about the family, mental health in this country, and then spirituality. And I want us to end on that note of religion in the public square, in specifically Christianity and culture. And there's some positive developments, I think, that are out there that I want us to close on. But Ron, the first topic, probably the biggest topic of 2024, has to be politics. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, the 2024 presidential election, we had so much drama. Going back to Joe Biden withdrawing from the presidential race after a disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump. And one of the ironies there was that the Democratic Party disenfranchised their voters and the opportunity to weigh in on their primary candidate. And a lot of them felt demoralized. And I think that showed in the results of the election on election day. But other developments on the political front, you had huge anti-Semitic protests on college campuses all across the country. And this is something that legacy media outlets really didn't do a good job, in my opinion, of covering. Alternative or new and emerging media outlets did, but it showed us a side of the younger generation, and particularly the climate on our college campuses related to anti-Semitism, as many of the students were doing some horrible things. And that contributed to the political conversation. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump back in Butler, Pennsylvania. That's right. There were two attempts, one where Trump was struck in the ear by a gunman's bullet, miraculously survived. I mean, literally was an inch from death. And by God's grace, his life was spared. And then you had another attempt at his place, golf course down at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. And then he went on to win the presidency. He was called Times Man of the Year. So let's unpack this a little bit. The political front. Ron, what am I missing? What else contributed to the political dynamic that we faced in 2024? What were some big issues? Maybe some things that I missed. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I think one of the big things with President Biden is when the American public saw him on the debate stage, it wasn't so much that he just did a horrible job. It was America saw for the first time, I think, his true cognitive abilities. And a lot of folks are like, wait a minute, this is the guy that we've got right now running the country. And so I think a lot of folks, not just Republicans, but a lot of folks were very concerned that there was a party that had elevated a person and was keeping a person at the top of the heap, if you will, who that was his A game. And so I think a whole lot of folks felt not only disenfranchised from their party, but just the whole notion of, wait a minute, is he just a puppet? And if he is, who is pulling the strings behind the scenes? And so I heard a lot of that conversation going on as well. And then the big issues of what is a personal right, what's a civil right, when it comes to abortions and the sanctity of marriage and issues along those lines. And a lot of people in my community felt like, a whole lot of, well, the notion that we're all free moral agents. And so we choose our path. But when the country asks through a vote, hey, what do you think? When the majority of people say, I don't think these things ought to be allowed, yet the government says, well, okay, we ask you, but it doesn't matter. We're gonna do what we want to anyway. I think a whole lot of folks were just, okay, this is just too much. When we're having transgender people who have every right to be able to live out their life as free moral agents, but when we take those and we allow them to go into schoolrooms and to kindergarten rooms and to be able to engage the children and to be able to say, hey, there's nothing wrong with this and all the rest of that. I think a whole lot of folks are like, hey, we got to stop this train because it's moving way too fast in the wrong direction.
So, Ron, was that issue of gender ideology a pressing issue for voters? Of course, you're a pastor. You've been a pastor for almost 30 years, I believe. In the Christian community, was gender ideology one of the motivating forces as they looked at candidates and looked at the election?
Well, I think so because society, whatever the laws of the land are, society moves in that direction. I won't name the facility, but it'd be very easy for folks to be able to find that. There's a nationwide chain of gymnasiums that people can go, and it's a very, very low cost. When all this came about, my wife and I that go there, my wife said, "Would you please find out what their policy is on use of locker rooms?" And we found out. I called the corporate office, and they said, "Whatever our customer identifies as, regardless of what their biology says, whether or not there's been any transition, surgeries, or anything else like that, whatever they identify their gender as, that's the locker room that they could use." And so my wife said, I'm not going to go into a locker room where some guy could just say, "Hey, I identify as a lady," and use the same facility. So it's not, it's not just in our schools anymore. It's in our everyday life activities. And so yeah, I think.
Ron, I appreciate your modesty. I am going to name names because we did talk about this fitness organization. It's Planet Fitness, and they came out a couple years ago that it was revealed that they were allowing men to use women's locker rooms, and that's a problem. I think we're doing a public service by being clear. We're not trying to slander or defame, but this is a policy that's widely known. And I think for the safety of women, I think that they have a right to know what is the policy regarding locker rooms and dressing areas. And in your case, this impacted your wife's decision on whether or not to join that club. And to your point earlier about going into the public schools, this was an issue that President Joe Biden made an issue several years ago. He interpreted Title IX to extend to transgender identity and impose this on public schools, their locker room policies, bathroom policies, school sports policies. And there was backlash against that.
And that, Richard, that's the most ridiculous thing. Any doctor or anybody that's even played sports, once a young man goes through puberty, and then decides that he identifies as a woman, even if he transitions surgically and takes female hormones, he has already received the advantage of testosterone that a young woman would never have. His bone structure is different. His muscle structure is different. And so anybody that participates in sports that is looking at it not from a political or an ideological sort of, but just a factual biology thing will say, if a human being has gone through puberty and it's a male, he will have in every situation an advantage, a physical advantage over a female. And so it's not a level playing field, but that's what they're promoting it as.
So Ron, and I appreciate you clarifying that, gender ideology was one of the big issues that was part of the political conversation. One of the other ones, too, I want to go back to was the legacy media's cover up of President Joe Biden's cognitive state. Wall Street Journal had an article towards the end of December about the cover up that happened just a year into his presidency, where they failed to cover serious gaffes. And look, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to stumble over our words and maybe literally stumble from time to time. But there was a pattern established early on in the Biden presidency that the mainstream media, the legacy media, failed to cover. And that might have been one of the biggest political stories of the year, just the complicity of the legacy media to not report the true health and the true cognitive state of our president. Here's my question to you. How do your people and your network, how do they receive legacy media outlets? I'm talking about the big three networks and CNN. How do they receive those outlets, or are they just totally tuned out of them?
Well, most are just tuned out. Years ago, I quit watching network television. I come from a background of media, and so there are Associated Press, Reuters, and organizations like that I'm able to peruse through the headlines and just look at some of those things and be able to do fact checks. I realize now that to borrow the media's term, talking heads, the people that the anchors, working in that industry so long, I realize there is a personal slant. As hard as they reportedly try to be unbiased, there is a bias, and typically it's a liberal bias. And so most of the folks that want what they call real news don't even get it from broadcast news anymore. They find alternative sources and things like that. But sometimes even then, you've got to cross reference between several outlets to be able to find where the truth is. And so,
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org.
Ron, that's a good pivot, Ron, to the next important development in 2024. And this is the rise of emerging media. And in particular, I'm talking about podcasts. Joe Rogan, for example, is the most popular podcast in the country. And that has taken the place of Walter Cronkite, if you will, back in the 70s and 80s. And right, wouldn't you say?
half of the audience has no idea who he is. The other half is mourning for those days. But yes, I agree. Yeah. Well, and actually, Richard, I think even prior to the podcast, we had this emergence when we had iPhones and phones where we were able to do what a term that they called citizen reporters, citizen journalists, all the way back to there's a special on one of the streaming services where a guy did a documentary on the war in Ukraine as a citizen reporter. And so with everybody having cameras and all the rest of that, a lot of people started to get their news from boots on the ground, from folks that were just reporting what was happening. And then I think the podcast, which is all because Joe Rogan's been on a podcast since 2009. And so, yes, in 2020.
But let me add now, he is watched more, at least in a 1 week time period, more than any of the leading legacy news outlet personalities, CBS, NBC, ABC. He is tuned in more often in 1 week than any single person in those other news outlets. And the reason I mention this, by the way, and why this is news is because during a presidential election year, typically candidates are going to want to go to all of the news outlets, but Donald Trump did not go to any of them. Why? Because he believed he was treated unfairly. Also, many voters have tuned out these outlets, so he went to Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan it was like a 2 to 3 hour interview. I listened to it, and it was a very good interview. But he went on to programs like that. He went on Tucker Carlson, which is one of the top 3 podcasts as well. So people, and here's the point, Americans are going to these new and emerging news outlets. They're tuning out of the legacy media. And this is the development. This is the big point. they realize that they have lost their influence when it comes to how Americans process candidates, elections, the issues. Donald Trump won despite them. Fun fact here, 80 to 90%, somewhere in that range, of the news stories from legacy media were negative towards Donald Trump. Inversely, 80 to 90%, 90% plus actually of the stories on Kamala Harris were positive. No surprise there. But it shows the influence that the legacy outlets have had. They're losing their influence and their impact, and they're trying to rethink and refigure what they're going to do. MSNBC, which is a significant, not one of the big three, but they're significant. They're cutting budgets because they're losing viewership. So there's a major change when it comes to delivering the news and the major news outlets.
I think another way maybe that the Democratic Party disenfranchised themselves with their voters is when Kamala Harris refused the invitation to go on Joe Rogan. 14.5 million viewers is what he has on each one of his podcasts. In 2020, the program that hired him, I forget where he moved to, Spotify, paid him $100 million to be able to buy his podcast. And when she said no, I think a lot of people thought, no, don't you realize we listened to this? And so when you're saying no, it was just another sign that they had lost touch with their constituents about what they were watching, what they were listening to, how they were getting their information. So,
Ron, let's pivot over to social issues. Gambling expansion, huge issue, particularly sports gambling. Kentucky legalized sports gambling less than 2 years ago. Whole bunch was wagered on various sporting activities. Across the nation, $150 billion was wagered on sports last year. That's a lot of money. In particular, it's young men who are impacted by this. They are interested in sports, and they are gambling with money that they really can't afford to lose. According to Les Bernal of Stop Predatory Gambling, Americans are on course to lose over $1 trillion over the next 8 years. That's $1 trillion. Now, that's not just sports gambling. That's all combined forms of gambling, whether it's casinos and slot machines and poker tables and lotteries. $1 trillion over an 8-year time period. This is a huge transfer of wealth. You have an industry that's preying on the hopes of people, and people are not getting richer by gambling. They're not finding a path to a better life or creating wealth and providing for their families, but they really, many of them caught in a trap, if you will. Many will develop addictions and compulsion and lose their hard-earned dollars. So here's my question to you. As a pastor, are you seeing, and you've got a big casino within 10 minutes of your church in Hopkinsville? Are you seeing people impacted by this? What are you seeing on the ground?
Well, yes, yes, it's impacted tremendously. Even to the point where I don't know all of the details, but there was a Christian rock group that headlined at that casino. So my thought is, and it's a group that I listen to, and I'm thinking to myself, what message are you sending when you're saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and perform there, so it's okay to be able to, and again, not trying to throw them under the bus. Everybody's a free moral agent. They get to spend their money the way they want to. But the reason the lights never go off on Las Vegas is because all the losers pay the electric bill. And so, I tell people, I was in the barbershop just the other day, and the barber was talking about, I go down to the every once in a while, and I don't spend too much and all the rest of that. And I said, go to any financial advisor and ask him what percentage, what would his advice or her advice be? What percentage of your income should you set aside for gambling? If you could find one financial advisor that would tell you even 0.1%, that I told him I'd buy him lunch. No financial advisor would say that's a good way to be able to invest your money, because the house always wins. And it does. It preys on people. the people who can least afford it are the ones that are in there the most often, because they think, well, we've tried everything else, and so maybe, just maybe. Well, this lottery that just came up paid over $1 billion. I wonder how many people sat back and thought to themselves, huh? So United States citizens lost over $1 billion trying to win this money. That doesn't make sense, and it does. It preys on the flesh. We're all sinful creatures, and it plays on the flesh.
Ron, one of the most shocking news items was caught on tape on the streets of New York City. It's when United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was walking down the street, and a person with a hood came up right behind him and gunned him down in cold blood. Luigi Mangione was eventually caught in Pennsylvania and prosecuted. He's undergoing, he's incarcerated, and he has been indicted for murder. One of the shocking things, not just was that awful, horrendous act of cold-blooded murder caught on tape, but it's the response from young adults in this country. This is not a mental health issue, but it is more of a state of mind issue. A survey found that 40% of young adults believe that the killing was justified. There's an antipathy towards big business, as in particular, antipathy towards the healthcare industry. But 40% of young adults think that it was justified. What do you do with something like that?
Richard, when as a country, as a country, we can say that we're gonna, when we have political parties that say we're gonna fight with everything that we have to give you the right to be able to terminate a baby's life. I mean, everybody loves a baby, but when we say we're going to give you the right to terminate a baby, at that point, all bets are off. I mean, because really think about it. Everybody loves a baby. Babies attract a crowd. But when we say it's okay to be able to terminate the life of that baby, and with abortion rights with younger people, you have a very high percentage of people that say yes, we think that ought to be legal and available and all the rest of that. Well, it's just a continuation of that same thought, that life itself is not sacred, and if it's an inconvenience or if it's an irritant or if you don't agree with it, well, just terminate it. And so again, I think it's an extension of the abortion issue, really.
Ron, the Oxford Word of the Year for 2024, I don't know if you've heard, it's called brain rot. And this is essentially mindless scrolling on social media and wandering through the internet. It's feeding your mind with unchallenging and useless information, and it's not good for our brains. Brain rot. And isn't that true? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, if you find yourself scrolling or maybe looking through the reels, you're doing the death scrolling, as they call it, not a healthy exercise for your brain. And hence, brain rot is the word of the year.
I'm convicted, because just the other day we're sitting in front of the TV, just going to relax for a minute and hey, let's watch some show, and that scrolling takes place for 5-10 minutes, just looking for that show, and finally I said to my wife, I said, just pick something, I could care less what it is, just pick something. But then I thought to myself, wait a minute, just pick something. How about we just shut that thing off and do something productive instead of just watching some mindless something or other. So it's
Yeah, that's good. Ron, man, it has been a joy to do this program with you. One last question before we close it out. Do you make New Year's resolutions? Did you make a resolution for this year?
Well, the old, yes, not to make resolutions. I don't anymore, because I realized I'm the kind of person that gets caught up in a moment. And so, yes, I'm going to make these resolutions because I'm caught up in the whole resolution moment, and my heart's not really behind it. And then 3 days after New Year's, where I realize I've not kept any of them, then I feel like a loser. And so, at this time of the year, you know, and this is my sermon Sunday, I'm not going to preach it, but Mary, after Jesus was born, she reflected about everything that she had been told and pondered things. I think during this post-Christmas time frame, and as we approach the new year, I think it's okay for us to reflect and ponder and take a look at last year. What were the good things we need to carry into the next year? What are some things we might need to change? But instead of making a resolution, just taking steps to be able to say, let me make these life adjustments, sort of a thing. And then if we do that all year long, then I think it'd be a whole lot easier than making resolutions.
Yeah, that's good. No, you share a lot of good points there. One of the things I've done in the last few years is to write down. First of all, is to reflect on the past year, like you said, but then also write down an area of spiritual improvement, something that I can meditate on or think on, or a spiritual truth that I need to remind myself of who I am in Christ. Or when I look at the world, to look at those who are broken and hurting and to have compassion on them. And I'll write down a spiritual challenge, if you will. Here's what I'm going to do. And it's not a promise, it's not really a resolution, but it is essentially taking inventory of the last year and looking ahead to the following year, and how can I apply, or where can I work on when it comes to spiritual growth. And I think that'd be good for all of us. At the heart of what we're talking about in this program, Ron, we reflected on this last year: social issues, political developments, trends when it comes to mental health or spirituality. And at the heart of it, it's what is our relationship with God, right? Who are we as Christians in Christ? And what does that mean for my life now and looking ahead? And that's a good challenge for us every day. Who am I? To remind ourselves, who am I in Christ? What does this mean for my life? How do I interact and engage with others? That is the transformative thing. And my hope for the listening audience here is that they would look to Christ, the only one who rose from the grave, the only one who can forgive us of our sins, the only one who gives us life and life more abundantly and puts us on a path to walk with him. And that's what we were designed to do, to walk with him. And my prayer and hope for all of the listening audience is that they would look to Christ and lean on him and grow in the faith and walk with him. When that happens in your individual life, your life will be turned not upside down, but right side up. And you're going to see some things differently in the upcoming year than you would in the past without Christ. So thank you. God bless you, Ron. You have a happy 2025.